I'm a little nervous. I'm never nervous to talk on camera, so this is new. This is happening. Okay, let me light this candle. Hi, babies. This is Chloe from ReiQueer.com, and this is my first podcast episode. Surprise! It's happening. So for those of you who are just stumbling upon my page or who don't know who I am, I'm a Black and queer Reiki practitioner. I actually just got my master level. I'm also a community educator, an equity consultant, a poet, all that other stuff. I'm here. That's what I am. I'm here. It's 2024. I'm here. So the reason why I started this channel is because I feel as though there's been a pretty significant split in who I am and who I present online, especially when it comes to like my personal page, which is kind of more private, and the ReiQueer. I feel as though I made that classic mistake of separating my personality from my purpose, and I don't see a lot of my actual self, a lot of my actual personality when I look at the ReiQueer, and I really want to kind of mesh the two together, especially for people who have been trusting me for years to do their Reiki or to come and help them learn things. I just feel like now is a great time to really integrate and to connect for real, because I got to say. I really envision this podcast to be sort of a hub for me to really connect with everyone, to share the things that I've learned along the way of my own journey. I want to be kind of like your cool-ish like wellness auntie for all the folks that are on their own spiritual or wellness journeys that are looking for advice or just looking for affirmations. I'm hoping this can be a space where you can find that. And I think above all, what I'm really fascinated by and interested in is really removing us wellness/healing practitioners off of this pedestal and off of this like we have to talk in the sexy baby voice and connecting to our purpose, and all that stuff obviously matters and it's important, but I think that we can get a little bit more raw than that, and I'm really hoping that that can come through in this space. So I'm going to be honest, I am pretty nervous about this. For those that know me, I'm literally never nervous to talk to a camera. I'm a Gemini. I was literally born for this. But this is a topic that I really have taken a long time to process. I don't really talk about it that much online. So I really do want to kind of lead with my fears here and take my time through this because I'm really ready to talk about it. And I really want this to be a foundational piece for people to get to know how I came to be and, you know, where I am in life and how it all connected from this point on. Let's first get started. I want to really take everyone back to right before I even knew that I wanted to be a Reiki practitioner, before I was even involved in the wellness sector, any of that. This actually brings us back to 2018. That number alone strikes fear into my heart. Oh my God, that was a wonky time for me. So I'm going to bring us back to 2018, what was happening for me, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the ReiQueer kind of came to be, how I even found this practice, which I'd never heard of before that point. Back in 2018, I was in a very unhealthy relationship. I'm not going to talk too much about this just because I'm actually going to do another episode where I chat more specifically about the timeline of my heartbreaks and what I've learned and kind of getting into details about that. But it is very relevant to the story. I was in this relationship and the person who I was dating was actually the person that really introduced me to a lot of matters about spirituality and about wellness. And I was really on that journey and I had just started to really be interested in my own spiritual wellness. They had tickets to, it was called a womb sounding event, which essentially was a bunch of people gathered in a room, a bunch of people who had wombs or womb spaces. And there was a practitioner there and we were literally like making sounds like, oh, ah, like I'd never been to anything like that before, but I was super open to it. I was like, all right, let's do it. And it was such a cool event. And yeah, it was really beyond what I thought it would be. I had a great time. While at this event, there was a Reiki practitioner were there. And if you wanted Reiki at the end of your session while we were in our own individual meditative states, then you would flip over this tarot card that they had given us at the beginning of the session. And if we didn't want it, we would flip it over like picture side down. I had never really heard of Reiki before, and I was super open and curious about it. So I flipped my card up, and that was the first time I met my Reiki teacher. Her name is Claire Kenty. Shout out to Claire. We love Claire. And we ended up connecting after the session, after the whole event, and I was so drawn to her. And I hadn't felt that way about anyone before, especially anyone in kind of the healing arts. It was really, again, I was super green. I was very new to it, and I just felt so drawn to it. And more than anything, I wanted to actually book with her. I wasn't even thinking about being a practitioner myself. I was super excited to meet her, and so I took the card home with me, the card that I had indicated that I wanted the Reiki with, and I was talking to my partner at the time, and they were like, girl, that's stealing. And I was like, oh my God, you are right. So I ended up reaching out to Claire, and I said, oh, I have this card. I'd love to give it back to you. And she was like, okay, well, you can mail it to me, or we can use this as an opportunity to meet for tea. And I was just like, oh my God. I was monstrously late. It's my toxic trait, but we ended up meeting up at this cafe. And in the time that we had left, she told me about where she was with her journey, how she came to be a Reiki practitioner. And when I first came to meet her, I was mostly just interested in being a client. The more she explained her own connection to Reiki, she explained what it was, which is a Japanese healing modality that essentially uses the energy that we all have access to in order to encourage and give ourselves permission to release at different areas. It's not quite the same as chakra healing, but it can certainly be beneficial for the chakras and different areas of the body. It's very somatic, but at the same time, very spiritual. So she was explaining all of this stuff to me, and very unexpectedly, I felt very drawn to it. The best way I can explain it is it felt as though she was describing something that I used to do that I had forgotten all about. But I had never done this before, and I never one time ever considered myself to be a practitioner or interested in the practitioner of healing or anything like that. So that caught me by surprise. She ended up telling me at the end of our meeting that she was going to be teaching a level 1 and 2 intensive, and I was like, all right, sign me up. So I ended up leaving that meeting with her completely in a different orientation than I thought I would be. I felt very excited. I don't know, there was something happening. I felt like I was at the precipice of something, and it really just came out of nowhere. And when things like that happen, it really encourages me to listen. And again, I was super open. I was at a very interesting time in my life. And so fast forward like 3-4 weeks, I think if I'm remembering correctly, course was going to be starting in March or April. And I ended up leaving that relationship at the end of February, I think beginning of March. It's been some years now, so the details are a little fuzzy. Thank God. The challenge, and this is the challenging part for me to talk about. So that relationship, for all that it did and all that it introduced me to, was very, very, very unhealthy. I was with a partner that thought it was okay to put their hands on me, and it was an abusive relationship. And it really took me a sec to realize that, because it was my first queer relationship. That person was super special to me, and it didn't look like what a domestic violence situation looked like to me in my head at the time, which was like, some like man like throwing you across the room or something. This was someone who looked like me and was the same size as me, and for a lot of reasons, it took me a minute to actually realize that this was so not okay. In the aftermath of that relationship, I was not doing very well. Let's just put it that way. It ended in a way that was very abrupt. It was very painful. It felt very spiteful. And I went from a life that I thought was just ironclad, this is my future, this is my person, to having to completely restart. I was in a new living situation. I had started a new job, and it was just, my life was literally falling apart. And it was too late to back out of this commitment, right? Because again, the class was supposed to start literally weeks after everything crumbled for me. And so going into actually training for Reiki, I was at at a very, very, very fragile place in my life. Not only that, but I was in need of serious healing myself. And I think this was the first time I really kind of came against that wall where I felt like, okay, I'm literally at my lowest right now. How the am I supposed to be the person who people go to help raise their awareness or to help witness their healing or to help facilitate that process? It didn't make any sense to me. And I think this is where I get more into understanding that whole sense of spiritual imposter syndrome and all of that. That was kind of the context that I was in entering learning level 1. And like I said, it was like a intensive. So in Reiki, there are 3 levels. There's the level 1, the intro level, level 2, and then there's the master level where you're able to teach. So the course that I was taking was a level 1 and 2 intensive, and I had no idea what to expect. But going into it, I quickly realized that it is not possible to position yourself as a practitioner or to learn any type of spiritual wellness modality without dealing and confronting with and building a relationship with your own trauma. Now, for me, it was particularly challenging because, like everyone else, I was coming with my own traumas that I just accrued in my life by being alive in the world. And I was literally weeks off of what at the time was one of the worst times in my whole life. It honestly still might have been to this day one of the worst times in my whole life. And so when I talk about spiritual imposter syndrome, I'm talking about feeling as though you are not healthy or healed enough to actually participate in your own spiritual wellness, or if you're a practitioner, feeling like you are not healed enough to be witness or to help facilitate that in other people. And that's exactly where I was. And so throughout the time, I really had to connect with myself in ways that I wasn't expecting to. I thought that it would be just like learning any other skill where you take a class, you make your notes, you study, but this was way more introspective than I realized. And through these courses or through the classes, which were in person at the time, I had to confront a lot of that was happening in real time. You know, I remember going to a couple of classes, and in one class in particular, my teacher, Claire, looked at me and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm great. I'm so great. I'm totally fine." And I feel like I was at that stage after something cataclysmic happens in your life where you have to kind of grow another layer. And this layer is a veneer. It's very thin. It's very, it's hard, but it's hard in the way that something brittle is hard, where it doesn't take too much for something to actually shatter it. And so even being asked that was kind of very jolting for me because I thought I was putting up, a great front. And after class, I just remember just like losing it and just being so embarrassed and just so like humiliated immediately after, because I'm like, who the do I think I am? I need intense therapy. I should not be here. This is not okay. I'm going to be the world's worst, most traumatized Reiki practitioner. And having these conversations one-on-one and even just being met with the warmth and the wisdom that I was met with really encouraged me to consider what I had in my mind of what a practitioner was and what I actually felt about the practitioners of wellness or energy in my life. And that brought me to really considering the fact that for people, I think within and outside of the healing arts, there really is a phenomenon where we put practitioners on a type of pedestal. And it took me a moment to really realize that's what I was doing. Because if I'm feeling like I'm not good enough or I'm feeling like I'm not worthy, then what is that saying about everyone else that is practicing this, right? That kind of goes with the assumption that everyone is at, this healed TM space. And that is the only space from which you can actually ground into this work. And that was simply not true. And I was a breathing example of that in real time. Simultaneously, while I'm training for Reiki for the first time, I'm learning the literal skill, I'm getting my attunements, I'm taking the classes, I'm also reckoning with the fact that I just died. Not to be dramatic, but that's literally what happens when you end one life and you're kind of thrust into another, especially unexpectedly, you have to mourn the part of yourself or the part of your life that is no longer living. And I had to really take it back to the basics. I'm talking teaching myself how to sleep again, how to eat, how to walk around, how to read, how to shower, really taking it down to the basics, stripping it down, because I did not feel well enough to have any other kind of complexity in my life. I had to really incubate. When I look back now at that period of time, that was one of the most beautiful, generative periods of time I've ever had. My life was so simple. I woke up, I did my laundry, I made my breakfast, I went to work, I had my dinner, I came home. It was very regimented in a way that I was my own mom. Another thing I completely forgot to mention, during this period of time, I was recently outed in my family. My family was not down with that queer. And so I was literally disowned at the exact same time. And so I had to heavily rely on community to even help me, not only financially, but just with my own morale. I had no blood family in my life aside from my nanny and my little brother. And so when I say I was at a low, I was at a low. I had to really make friends with the darkness that I was surrounded by. And it was in that space that I really cracked open. Like I said, I died. I was not the same person anymore. And I feel like I was in that in between. I hadn't reincarnated into my new life just yet. However, life goes on even if you don't. And so there were things that I just had to shelf, and there were things that I kind of just had to wait until I got home. I could cry it out, I could scream it out, I could do whatever. But like I said, it was a very generative period of life, and ready or not, I still had to do, I still had bills to pay, and now I had this new skill to hone and this new skill to practice. And so, it was kind of a lot. It was in this period that I also really started to understand the myth of the ego death. I know that we've been taught that, or we might have heard that, how we need to kill our ego or we need to experience an ego death. And on the other side of that is our spiritual awakening or whatever. Honestly, I don't really think that's true. I think that thinking that you can kill your ego is a function of the ego telling you that you can kill the ego in order to conquer the ego. It's hilarious, and it's not true. I really believe that that's a myth. And I think that because having an ego is a part of the human condition. It's not something that we cut off or something that we remove in order to be an enlightened being and then we never experience the ego again. I don't think that's at all. I actually don't even think that it's something that you have to fight with or battle with. I think the ego is something that needs to be integrated. It's something that you need to build a relationship with. I think the ego teaches you so much about yourself, about the recesses of your mind, about your shadow, about the beliefs that you hold on to that you're ready to let go of, but you're too ashamed to confront. All of these things are the ingredients of the ego. And when I was in that period of my life, it was so clear to me that I had to communicate with that part of myself. And I had to not only know myself through my ego, but build a relationship with it. And in doing so, have communication with my ego. And in doing so, I think really primed me to be, if I say so myself, a pretty decent practitioner, because I understood that I was a part of a much larger web of people and experiences and things that I understood and things that I didn't yet understand. But as I was integrating all of that and as I was learning, I needn't put myself on a pedestal, but I also needn't put myself down for that. And so I really found this sweet spot of being able to communicate with my ego. And, it was great hearing a lot of truth bombs in class. Just a little bit of an aside, it's not necessarily a pet peeve, but I'm always, and I think you guys should too, as we are building our own muscles of spiritual discernment, I think a big part of that is paying attention to the language of the practitioners of wellness or healing arts around you. If someone is exclusively positioning themselves as a healer, and I'm not even on that because healers are a real necessary function of our community for sure. However, I think that when someone is exclusively positioning themselves as a healer of other people, just to be careful with that, because we are all self-healers. We are all on that journey of communicating with and healing ourselves, whether we are on the side of the spectrum where we are fully involved in that, or whether we're on the side of the spectrum where we're not ready to confront it. We are all on that journey, like it or not, or know it or not. And so it's important to remember that if you're working with a Reiki practitioner, if you're working with any type of practitioner of the healing arts, that you are the one who is doing the healing, and your practitioner is the one there to help you witness and to help facilitate, or to maybe help explain things to you. It's kind of like if I were to break my arm right now and go to the doctor cannot fuse my bones back together and literally heal me. The doctor can position it or put it in a cast or make sure that I am positioned in the way, or my arm is positioned in the way for healing. But it's my cells, it's my body that actually generates the healing. That's the best analogy I can give. So as I mentioned before, because of all the things that were happening and all the destruction that was going on in my life, not only was I reckoning with that, but I was also in a very deep period of mistrust of myself. I couldn't believe that I allowed myself to go through a situation like that. And in hindsight, I know that that's super victim blamey and totally not my fault, but that's just how I felt at the time. I felt as though I had failed to do my one job on this earth, which was keeping myself safe. And so I no longer deserved my own trust, because what the was that? And so this certainly contributed to my imposter syndrome. However, this was also a catalyst for me to think differently and really change my mindset about this work. Because as I mentioned before, there is no prime condition, there is no completely 100% healed that we're ever gonna attain, by the way. That's never gonna be a thing. And if you're interested in actually connecting with your purpose here, and if your purpose here is to help facilitate that healing for other people, you really have to ask yourself what that looks like in your head. And are we only worthy to do this work if we're healed? Which, as I just explained, the goalpost is always gonna move around, and we never are going to have that 100%. The most we can do is make friends and connect with our ego, connect with and understand our trauma, connect with and understand our shadow. I think this is truly the ingredients of being a practitioner that is able to hold accountability for ourselves in the spiritual and metaphysical sense, but to also really approach this work from a place of honesty with ourselves, starting with ourselves. And so that's just where I was with that. That's kind of the context of me learning Reiki. And once I was done, is when I really started to get a little bit excited about what I was actually going to do with this and the ways in which I wanted to connect. At this point in my career, I had just started working with queer community. I'd actually just left my corporate job. I had worked corporate for years, since I was 18 or 19, and at this time I was 22. And so I was in a space where I just started working with community. I'm getting my feet wet, traumatized as hell. I was in my get up and go era. That's what I call that phase in my life. So many things were just so chafing. It was too much. Learning new concepts, sometimes it would just trigger me. I would think of things that were said to me, things that were done with me. That relationship really did a number on me. And I had to learn how to re-enter into society, truly, how to have a conversation, how to sit through a workshop. Everything was triggering. It was a challenging time. And so I call that my get up and go era, because I'd be going about my day, doing my best. Something would happen. Day is done. 12 p.m., 1 p.m., 5 p.m., 7 p.m. Doesn't matter. I'm triggered. I gotta leave. On my Annalise Keating, I'm picking up my bag and I'm walking out the door. Good night. We'll try again tomorrow. That was where I was in life. And so I was still, though, very, very committed to this new, at the time to me, this new sector of my career where it was less about, oh my God, I hated corporate. It didn't make any sense to me. It was less about the numbers and the business and all that stupid that doesn't matter, and more actually about the people. And I was blessed enough to actually be working with queer community, specifically queer youth. Changed my whole life. It changed my life. And so as I was entering this, and as I was learning this new skill, and even after I had learned after I had earned my level 1 and 2 certification, it kind of became clear to me that I really wanted to merge these two together, and that my purpose was very much connected with and rooted with the queer community, the community of people of color, but also people who were starting on their wellness journey and people who were fresh off of unlearning things. Because it's one thing to unlearn something, it's one thing to gain new knowledge and realize, okay, what I thought isn't the truth. But it's another thing to have knowledge that replaces what you previously thought. And I think that sweet spot is where we're able to have so many magical moments and revelations and learn new things. And I really wanted to work with people who were just walking that line for themselves. And so that's who I started with. I started with people in my community. I started with other queer folks who I knew online, my friends, people who had supported me in leaving my old relationship. I was energy exchanging. I remember I did Reiki for like a tub of spaghetti once. Like, it was just such a fruitful, beautiful time. I was kind of like a baby deer. I was finding my footing in this new modality. And I was so shocked that people were trusting me and gravitating towards me. And actually, I'm like, oh my God, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe I'm not like the hot mess express. Well, I was, but maybe it's okay. Maybe like both of these things can exist at the same time, which I never knew before. And that's where I came up with the name, the ReiQueer. So the word Reiki actually means, it's split into two. So Rei means divine or sacred, and Ki means energy. And so my wordplay with that is the ReiQueer, so like the divine queer or the sacred queer. And it was super important for me to position those words together. And I actually wrote a poem. It's called Hymn of the Holy Homo. I'll put it up on the ReiQueer.com so folks can read it. But I was really reckoning with the fact that I had just gotten disowned by my family. They thought that I was this like hellbound heathen. Meanwhile, I'm literally a baby girl. I'm literally a newborn baby. Leave me alone. I'm trying. Okay, I was my own mom and I was trying. And in this period of like reparenting myself, I realized how so many other people in my community, so many other queer people, so many other people in just like the queer and trans community at large were on that exact same journey of having to parent ourselves and be there for ourselves in the same way a mother would or in the same way a family member would. And that struck me because there is something so pure and innocent about reparenting yourself. You're connecting to the purity and the innocence, the same exact purity and innocence that we had as children, as a person who is newly out or as a person who is really connecting with who they truly are and bravely living their life. And that's where I was with that. I felt like on this side, my family or people who are homophobic might have looked at me or looked at my life and thought one thing about how not okay it was or how far from God's light that was. But here I was in such an innocence. I was in such I felt so connected to the world, to God, to myself. And there was such an innocence, there was such a joy, there was such a purity there. There was such a sacredness, there's something so divine about the nature of being queer. And what people don't realize is to go against queerness, to be homophobic, to be transphobic is sacrilege because you're going against God's creation. You're going against who people actually are at their core. Oh my God, I'm in my pastor era. But for real though, that's exactly what I was feeling. And so very important for me to have that language of divinity beside queerness and to really open that door to say like, we can be bold enough to reclaim our purity and to reclaim our innocence and our childlike joy because there's nothing wrong with us and we're not doing anything wrong. That was the birth of the ReiQueer. I started that name. I remember I literally was like thinking about all these different, I have the notes still in my phone. I was like typing all these things and then it came to me and I'm like, yes, this is it. And it was under that name that I began the ReiQueer. And I initially started off strictly as a Reiki service. And so I was working with tons of my friends, tons of people who trusted me because I was one of the only queer, openly queer practitioners of Reiki or of energy work that a lot of folks had seen. I think there is an oversaturation of a certain type of practitioner, and it was very refreshing for people to see someone from their own community who was doing this type of work. Not like I was the only one, but for a lot of people, I was one of the only people who were positioned this way that were doing this type of work. And I think that really connected me with a lot of folks, and it helped me to earn the trust of a lot of folks. So shout out to all of my first clients. I think about you guys all the time. Now, the ReiQueer has expanded. So not only am I a Reiki practitioner, but I also offer workshops. So I do things like going to schools or going to nonprofits, organizations, individuals, doing internal training for staff, but also larger workshops. Been invited back to my old university a couple times to do guest lectures. It was called Ryerson. Now it's called Toronto Metropolitan University, TMU. I've been around. I'm very fortunate to have been around while I was still living in Toronto to work with organizations that I literally would write them on a list, and one by one, I was able to have the opportunity to work with them. And that was super, super cool. That is what really helped me understand how much of my purpose this was, because it all just aligned, it all fell together, and it's been a very natural expansion. As I mentioned before, I'm a Gemini. It's very hard for me to stay consistent with something and to follow it through. My Capricorn moon helps with that, and in this case, the ReiQueer is the longest relationship that I have ever had with a creation, and so it's very, very precious to me. Now in 2024, I'm actually master level. I just got my Reiki level 3. I'm not quite ready to teach yet, but I am super excited to have accomplished that. It was something I really wanted to do for a long time, and all of the expansion and all of the places that the ReiQueer has brought me has always just reaffirmed my purpose. And so this, I guess, is another bit of another arm of that expansion. And I have a lot of hopes, I have a lot of dreams, and this has been one of them for so long. I've been wanting to do this forever. But every time that I got too close to talking about that relationship, there was a lot of intimidation, there was a lot of being watched, there's a lot of surveillance. It's actually what made me make my page private. There's nothing worse for a Gemini than not being able to communicate, not being able to express ourselves. And I really felt like I had been silenced. I felt like it couldn't actually go there. And so I didn't for a long time. That was helpful for a little bit because it really allowed me. I'm the type of person where I'm able to process things, and a big part of my healing journey is by sharing. I believe that people heal different ways. Some people heal, very with themselves. They have to have that moment of solitude. Some people heal strictly with their closest confidants. I'm the type of person where I heal very much through sharing my story, through connecting with other people, through talking about it. And when I wasn't able to do that, I had to really pivot. And that helped protect me in a way because it really forced me to confront this only with those who I was closest with, only with those who I had a lot of trust with. But it really is my nature to talk about it and share about it. And now that it's been years, oh my gosh, I think it's been 5 years now, which is so nuts. Oh my gosh, life is amazing. But now that I'm so far removed from that situation, it really is not possible for me to tell the story of the ReiQueer and how this came to be without talking about that. And I feel like that's why there has, to me at least, felt like there was such a gaping hole. When I look at my page on the ReiQueer, when I look at my website, when I look at all the things that I've put out under that name, there's so much of me missing from that. And so this is my attempt, and this is my intention to really connect myself more holistically with my work so that I'm not just a service, I'm not just a business, that you guys really understand the person behind it and, who I actually am. Because I'm ready. I got some shit to say. I'm ready. This was our first episode. For those who have journeyed with me, for those who already knew my story from before, I just want to say thank you so much for just being so supportive. It's been years and you guys are still here for my ridiculous shenanigans. And I hope that this is a way for you to really understand what it is that I'm doing. I felt like I separated Chloe and the ReiQueer so much that now I really want there to be more of an intermingling. And for those who don't know me or this might be your first time meeting, I really hope this felt like a genuine introduction, and I hope that you guys stick around. I'm super excited to see what this show looks like, what we'll be getting into. For our next episode, I'm going to be talking all about my heartbreaks. And I'm going to specifically talk about the ways in which heartbreaks taught me things and the lessons that I learned on there. And I'm going to talk about how the moon helped me to find my true love. Shout out to Orion. Actually, while we're here, shout out to Orion Rise Productions, who is filming and editing this video. I'll make sure that his information is on the screen. If you'd like to read my accompanying blog piece to this podcast episode, you can find that at thereiqueer.com/blog. And you can also send me any questions or any comments at ReiQueer on Instagram or Chloe@thereiqueer.com. And if you're interested in booking with me for either Reiki services, equity consulting, workshop facilitation for your organization or groups, you can find all that information under booking on my website, thereiqueer.com. So this has been our first episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. You're able to find this podcast on YouTube or any other streaming platforms that you normally listen to your podcast on, like Spotify or Apple. And once again, I'm Chloe from thereiqueer.com. Until next time.